Sigh, all good things have to come to an end, but let's at least waste some time for the next hour and a half delaying that. Welcome back to our second class of Waterbirds. This is part of a series of birds and birding on the Eastern Shore. And given the fact that news is not the best nowadays, I'm going to start with some good news. This was in Smithsonian Magazine just last night, and I was actually wondering what was going on with this. There is a Laysan albatross on Laysan Island that was first banded by our own, if you're a Marylander, our own Chandler Robbins, who just passed away at age 99 a couple of years ago. He first banded this bird, which has since been named Wisdom, that was not his name, with a band that can be recognized, in 1956. It was banded on a nest in Laysan Island. Since Laysan albatrosses at least take about 5 years to mature, if you do the math, the bird is somewhere around 70, you're right, 74 years old minimum, maybe a bit, it could be a tad earlier.
Wow.
In November of last year, November 30th, I think it was, it laid an egg. She's been actually through about 5 mates. One of them lasted long enough to get a name, but her current mate is, as far as I know, is unnamed. But that band itself has actually been replaced. Z333 has been replaced several times due to wear. This is an oceanic bird. But anyway, on November 30th, I believe it was, it laid an egg. And on February, I'm trying to, let's see, somewhere in here, but just a few days ago, November 26th, laid an egg. Egg hatched, took care of it. Anyway, it's like the early February this year, something like that. She was away. The energy of making a nest and laying an egg took a lot of time and energy out of her, so she went and was foraging when the egg was hatched in February, and her mate took care of her. So the first time she got back, there was a member of the Fish and Wildlife Service out there who took a video of her first encounter with her chick. And I thought she would enjoy just seeing this little bit of behavior here. So there, that is Wisdom, taking care of her chick at age at least 74 for Wisdom. You can hear cooing to it a little bit. That was her first encounter of it. The bird itself by then is about 10 days old.
Oh.
Something like that.
So are they like puffing up the feathers and removing any liquids?
Yes. Probably mainly since the chicken hatched already, probably just hooking them up, keep taking care of it. Laysan Island is near Hawaii, so it's in the midway chain. So the temperature, everything's pretty good, but even so, it's also wet at times, so she's just basically caring for the feathers. So we hope she'll fledge. She doesn't nest every year. Sometimes there's a gap of 2 or 3 years, and then they'll come back occasionally. The eggs were taken care of by predators, which live on the island itself. These are not introduced predators, but natural birds like gulls and the like. There's more about it in this article. It's in Smithsonian Magazine. If you get the magazine itself, or in my case, I just get it a daily download from it anyway. And I usually don't just kind of glance through, but I noticed this one about Wisdom. Again, Chandler Robbins wrote the Golden Field Guide for North American birds, if you're familiar with that. He is a Marylander. He worked at the Tucson Wildlife Research Center until his death, and started the North American Breeding Bird Survey, among other things. He's quite a fixture here in Maryland, very well known, and an amazing guy. I had the pleasure of meeting him several times. I never birded with him directly, but I met him in the field at Blackwater. And he showed me my first brown-headed nuthatch. So, so anyway, in Smithsonian, there'll be information about this and about the Wisdom. Or if you just Google Wisdom, you can probably find more information. Okay. that again. Right. And now we'll go back to slides. So here's the sort of the splash side to get started. And what I'm going to do now is to start this from the beginning and go to what looks like our screen here. This is sort of what we did. Those of us who stuck it all out, like yours truly and a couple of others, this is basically where we went. It has been, for me, the most challenging field course that I've done that in my memory, and certainly in the series of birds and birding on the Eastern Shore. The weather was just amazing, and I don't mean that in a good way. It really was a challenge. We did get pretty good views at Oakley Street. It's a good thing we went when we did because it froze solid a week later, and there was not a duck to be seen. We went to, shortly after the really cold snap, we attempted to go to the coast and did well there, had some coastal specialties. But when we got to Heron Park on the way home, all of that was frozen solid, even though some of the coastal waters were not. And we did get to see a couple of the specialties there. We focused on diving ducks, went down to Tillman. I think we got a horned grebe there. We got some good looks at some scoters and long-tailed ducks, among others.
And a hawk and an eagle.
Yeah, hawks and eagles.
And that was a good day.
Yeah, no, it actually was a good
It was a
day.
beautiful day.
We had one of our bigger checklists on that day. So that was, and it was probably one of the most pleasant of the days that we had. That ain't saying much. We went to Pickering Creek and got to see several ducks, our first green-winged teal, and probably our best looks at those, our first looks at pintails, and we had some snow geese fly over, so that was also nice, although we didn't see any of the dark dwarfs, at least in the flocks that I saw. And then we wound up at Blackwater with a potpourri. Fewer waterfowl there than I would have expected. The snow geese apparently had left. The Talbot Bird Club is going there on Sunday this week, so I'll see if anybody else shows up there. I'm not leading that. But in any case, that was a cold and windy day as well. And we did the best we could, but we did see lots of Canada geese. And one thing I did anticipate was a lot of pintail, and then we see a bunch of those. So that's basically it. But those field trips were a real challenge, and I really am grateful to everyone for their keeping up with their attitude, encouragement, and interest, because that would try men's and women's souls, I think. Hopefully, when I do warblers this spring, maybe we won't get rained out. Okay, let's see what we learned, if any. These are my pictures. They're not all from this year, but they're from places that we went. In most cases, what's this? It's actually sitting on some ice, nice and close.
Widgeon.
Yeah, anybody, even the online people, don't mute yourself, yell it out. I heard widgeon. Yeah, this is the American widgeon or bald pate. It has that shiny crown there, white crown, the green swash back from the eye. There's a patch of white on the wings, which usually shows up in both the drake and the hen. This guy was sitting on ice at Oakley Street a couple of years ago, and all fluffed up to get warm. That one you should know.
Yep.
It is.
Canvasback.
Why? What's special about it? Name two things.
White back.
White back?
And the linen. Oh, the nose.
The nose, that's right. The bill, that slopey forehead. Very characteristic. If you can get a good look at it, even in the air, you can see that. It has some other features that hunters and others can recognize a lot easier than I can. But that Roman nose on the water, certainly. It's the only large duck. This is the size of a mallard or a widgeon. It's the only large duck like that. It is a diving duck. It has that profile. We only saw a couple of these, but they're mighty pretty.
Merganser.
It's a diving duck. I heard part of it. It's a merganser, right? It doesn't have the real thick duck bill, right? Thinner. All right. This is the hooded. This is the hooded merganser. At least nobody said bufflehead, so that's good. Because bufflehead has doesn't really have anything like this profile, but it does have the white on the back of the head, but it doesn't have the black band that borders it. The bill shape is very different. It's about the size of a bufflehead. Prefers fresh waters or the upper parts of creeks, tributaries in the Chesapeake region. I believe we saw, not this particular one, but we saw it at the Bayside Development ponds that were bubbling. And there were a couple sitting there on the water.
Wait, a question?
Yes,
The duck's head looks unusually large for the body, is that?
probably feathering
Okay.
as much as anything else. Although in the hand, again, I'm not a hunter, so I don't have a chance to really look at them. But if you look at duck heads, there's a fair amount of puffiness to the head anyway. Some ducks, like goldeneye, it's quite obvious, even though it's not a crest, it's just a puffy head. So that's part of what you're seeing, which is a good eye for that. Canvasback being a diving duck doesn't show it so obviously there, but then it made it just come up out of the water. So it could be laid back. This is a diving duck. It's actually a sea duck. Picture was taken at OC Inlet.
There's a scooter.
Surf.
Which one? What?
Surf.
Surf scoter. Okay. Skunk head. All right. With the white on the head, all dark body. You can get some hint of the fact that the legs are pretty far back on the body. You can see the upper ends of them. These sea ducks don't do much on land. They have to nest on land, but they don't waddle around like a barnyard duck does. They just can't go. So, and in breeding season, they are coming into now, you have this very, very colorful kind of swollen bill as well. This is a diving duck in the subclass sea ducks because, for the most part, it likes big water. It doesn't necessarily have to be far from the coast. All right, about the same size, actually probably a little bulkier. Yes, common loon. Okay, doesn't have the spatulate bill that a duck has. It has a dagger-like bill, holds it horizontal for the most part. That my scope was tilted when I got that picture. Also, you see a little bit of the legs are way back on the back there. Again, it does not do well on land. It is not a duck. It is in its own group with grebes and loons. And this is the winter plumage. This is the loon on Golden Pond. This is a blow-up picture a bit, but it is also a diving duck, generally fairly small.
Right.
It's the Duddy Ruck. Yeah, right. It's a stiff tail, and this particular one has the tail straight up like that. Several ducks, including the scoters, will have their tails elevated above the water, but not like that. This is a drake that's just beginning to work into breeding plumage. It really is very ruddy in full breeding plumage, and the bill gets rather blue. And the face patch is even brighter in contrast with the rest of the plumage. Ruddy ducks, sometimes in the spring, they will form rafts of thousands. I've seen that in the Choptank River in late March, I think, as I recall, and off of the Horsehead Peninsula up at the Chesapeake Bay Environmental Center, south of the Bay Bridge. That's a good place to see a lot of them as well. They usually
Except this winter.
Yeah, so far. Well, I think they have yet to build, I think. I hope that's true. That a duck?
That could be a different color.
Okay.
Ringbill.
Ringbill gull. Okay, what two things tell you that?
Ring around the bill.
Got it? You can't always see it unless you're close, but that's true.
The color is like sea.
Yes, legs and feet. Yeah, yellow legs and feet. In an adult, the back of gulls is sometimes called the mantle or the saddle. Mantle really refers to the back itself, and the saddle is the whole thing with the wings. But I use mantle pretty generally. It's an adult bird because it has pretty much not specks or other streaks on the mantle itself. And in the adults, you can tell that from a herring gull by the legs. Herring gull legs are pink in the adults. Pink legs don't help you much with the juveniles. And since this is a 3-year gull, this is a herring gull, it takes that long to get that plumage. There's a little bit of streaking on the head. Many of our white-headed gulls get streaky in the wintertime, and that's feathering is lost as spring advances. That was taken in the parking lot in Ocean City. How about this weirdo? One of our, to me, this is one of our favorite looks.
That was our best day too.
Wasn't that a
We
great
stayed
day?
in the tree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you know, there's 6 or 7 there now.
Oh, yeah, you're just bragging because we
Yeah.
saw one.
Yeah, we've had them one.
Yeah.
It is-
Is it night?
Go ahead.
A night heron.
Night heron. This is the black crown night heron. Yellow crown would be very rare here. Would have streak on the head, thick black line over the eye. But this is the black crown night heron. It is an adult, and I was able to get a good digiscope of that. You can see the streamers going down from the back of the head in that bird. So, but ours was nice and cooperative as well, and I think a lot of you got really good looks at it. And as I said, there's 5 or 6 or maybe even more at that roost now, or they were the last time I was there with the Talbot Club. And this is again a blow up because it's a smaller shorebird. We saw lots of them at Blackwater in a couple of places.
So, Dunley,
Dunlin, that's correct, that's a Dunlin. Other name, which you would see if you look at a field guide, would be redback sandpiper. Because of its plumage in the breeding season, it has a black patch in the lower belly and very red, kind of like a ruddy duck on the back. So a very different type of plumage. So there are a couple of other things that I was trying to point out. The bill itself is fairly long looking for the bird that size with a bit of a droop at the end, which is noticeable even at some distance. And its behavior, which separates it from plovers like the killdeer by the fact that it walks and picks along at the same time. Whereas plovers typically walk, stop, and pick, or walk and stop, walk and stop. And that separates 2 large groups of shorebirds from each other, which helps out a lot. Killdeer is the only plover we saw. I tried to get us a black belly, it didn't work. Just, I knew there was some there, it's kind of this. Okay, not bad. And not only not bad, but you're learning the names so that it's not just a matter of learning how to identify, but you're getting familiar with what the birds are called, which I think is, for novices in particular, that's a big hurdle. You know, what the heck is a scoter?
Right.
So, or some people say scooters. Let's try a couple of other pictures as well. This one,
That's the ringneck.
Lesser skull.
no, not a skull.
Lesser Skull. Is it, oh, no, it's not.
No,
Golden eye?
no,
It looks like a skull.
it's a small duck. It's a little bigger than a ruddy.
Oh, no, it doesn't.
It's a diving duck. Anybody?
Is it rainbow?
Ringneck.
Ring-necked. The funny looking head, you were asking about the feathering on the head. See how puffy that head looks in the back there? It's not really a crest, but there are, if you will, loose feathers there. The neck ring is not visible. It's very dark brown, just almost never shows up unless you've shot it. But one thing that shows up at some distance is that white triangle that comes up in front of the wings from the water, broader at the base, narrow at the top, and that shows up as a nice white fleck, even in ducks at some distance, in the drakes.
And what about the bill though? Because that seems like it's a pretty good.
And it is, yeah, if you get a good look at it, if it's flying in the air, you really
Yeah.
can't see that. Nor does the triangle show up very well. But it does, the base of the bill has white all the way around it, and it does have a ring at the end of the bill, but for whatever reason, the hunters have decided that the name they use is ring-necked duck and not ring-billed duck. And so what, the head shows a kind of purplish iridescence in most lights,
Yeah, I thought it had
right, and a lighter eye.
color. I was thinking green, but it's
Right.
purple.
It's one of the earliest ducks to come back if you've had a lot of ice on the water. It's one of the earliest to come back. And although it is a diving duck, it's able to, it's not too big, so it's able to show up in smaller ponds. Some folks who got to Berlin after we got frozen out and had a look, I think last weekend, found them there in the first pond. It was frozen over when we were there. And they do have to run along the water, but they can, because of their size, they can get into the air fairly quickly. Unlike dabbling ducks, which can slap the water with their wings and jump straight up. Okay. The one in the center is the one I'm interested in.
The great black.
Okay, yep, Christina's got it. Great black-backed gull. It's the biggest gull in the world. adult has pink legs. There's some other pink-legged gulls near it with their heads tucked in. What do you think they are?
Well, those would be the herring gulls.
There's a herring gulls. So the great black-backed gull, which is a little further away than the herring gulls on the left there, still looks bigger. If it were next to them, it would look quite a bit larger. The mantle and the great black-backed gull is basically very dark slaty black. Looks black in some distance. Size is helpful because it's a big bird. Even in the juveniles, they're big as well. There's some other differences too. There's a juvenile herring gull there left in the middle. The world's biggest gull. We actually have in Maryland at some times of the year the world's biggest gull, which is this one, and it breeds here. Poplar Island, you'll see it in the Chesapeake Bay. It seems to like to be out sitting on buoys in the Chesapeake. We also have the largest tern, which is the Caspian tern, which migrates through here. It's bigger, almost twice as big as the Forsters that we saw. How about those? I warned you about these guys.
Tails, male and female.
Yeah, there may be a hen in the second from the left, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Or it just might be that there are at least 4 males there.
Maybe the head.
Yeah, exactly. This is the northern pintail, because there's a Caribbean pintail, a couple of other types as well. That's what it looks like when it comes up. And you can recognize the brownish head. And again, in flight, it's one of the more streamlined of the mid-sized ducks. Mallards look chunky compared to the pintail because of the extended tail and the small head leading along. So they look, some of my birding colleagues call them the greyhounds of the ducks. It's a dabbling duck, obviously.
So the one that's all the way on the right, the tail is not as black as the two in the middle. So
Right.
could that be a female?
That might be a hen. I don't see, unfortunately, a piece of grass is in the way.
Oh, right.
But the tail would be shorter. It would be pointed, but
Uh-huh.
not as big. And that could be a hen. I can't tell with the grass there at all. Hens are usually streakier though, so most likely that is a male. It's just a perspective based on how he's facing or how he's butting us. Okay, that was taken at Blackwater. All right, this is a tough one, but if you're looking at binoculars looking at waterfowl, in the sense this is the kind of fuzziness you might have to deal with. The common duck here, you do get an error. Take that one there.
Redhead.
Nope,
No?
nope. Look at the back.
I think it's a good canvasback.
Yeah, most of those are canvasbacks. This was taken at Oakley Street last year, I think. All right, the others, there are actually 4 species in here. The other ones have darker heads. There's a line of them over here to the right. They have darker heads. Okay,
Are they scalps or something?
they are scalloped. That's correct. And you couldn't tell from this picture.
The
Which?
bill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know.
In the original picture, I blew this up quite a bit, but in the original picture, you can see that there's a bit of a tuft on the top of the head, toward the back of the top of the head. So they are lesser scalloped. That's what we saw when we were at Oakley Street. A tougher identification, if I can still find it, is this one right here. And yeah, pure distance and everything else, but this is the kind of challenge you have to deal with sometimes. That bird has a white top to the head. And get the pointer back. White top to the head and some green going back through the eye. It's facing right.
That's a widgeon.
That's a widgeon. That's a Drake widgeon. That's right. And I found this guy after much looking. There is one of these in here. Come on, there you go. Has a yellowish bill, a greenish head, and a little bit of rust on the chest. That's a male. So, but often, especially if you don't have a spotting scope, this is what you have to deal with. So, at Oakley Street, there'd be, of course, a lot plainer because they'd be right at your feet. But if you had to look further out and look out into, say, in there, you can begin to see that it gets to be a challenge. And that's why I often talk about learning not just color and field marks that Peterson used to talk about, but the overall gist. Pintails look like greyhounds. You can separate diving from puddle ducks, from dabbler ducks. You can separate a ruddy duck from a lot of others because of the tail. There are a lot of little things that don't necessarily show up as errors in the field. That the more you get out, the more practice you have, the better you get. And it's fun to be able to say, oh, that's a whole herd of greater skull, without having to go through, look it all up. That takes time, but hopefully it takes fun as well. Okay, that's Oakley Street. I was with the Talbot Bird Club last weekend, and we went up to a place we didn't get to in the course. And I wish we had, I guess, although I don't know the day we were there with all the wind and everything, but it would have been productive. This is just a small bit of a big scene at the end of one of the jetties in Indian River Inlet. And there are two species in here. Anybody identify which they are?
The black square.
Okay, somebody said black scoter. Okay, black scoter has the orange knob,
It's like a mallard.
all black plumage otherwise, orange knob at the base of the bill. Lots of them in there. We only saw 2 or 3 at Ocean City. There were probably several hundred, if not a couple of thousand of these birds, all massed together at the end of the jetty. You can see a little bit of why I said the diving ducks. There's one going down now. What's the other one?
Is there a mallard or no?
There is another one in there.
The white
It's a golden.
Yep, down the lower right.
looks like a swan.
Down.
Oh, down there.
This one.
Okay.
No.
Yes, surf scoter. That's the skunk head.
The skunk head.
That's the skunk head, okay? See the differences in the head and the bill, in the two? There are also some hens in there, so we can also do those. There's a hen, there. There's a hen, black scoter. They look like they have a cap. They're brownish, or they often look black at a distance, but somewhat lighter on the face, but no patches on the face, just lighter. So it's black cap looking. That's the hen, black scoter. And over here is a hen surf scoter. They have these little 2 white patches on the side of the head, but not the black cap. So the appearance is different in terms of it. And that shows up pretty well in binoculars. You know, if you were in Ocean City Inlet, look up across at the jetty, you could make that out. I looked around here to see if there's anybody else in here. When we went up there with the bird club, we actually saw 4 harlequin ducks, including one day. And that was quite a sight. They were across on the other side, but we got good looks at all 4. And the female harlequin looks a little like a female surf scoter, but the patches of white are very distinct and bright. So it has 2 little marks on the side of the head as well. But after you get used to surf scoter, you can tell the difference.
What is the one flying on the right?
That's a gull, and I'll be honest with you, I can't tell because I can't see the bill.
Where's his head?
Yeah,
He's going away.
I think, I'm not sure he's going away, but again,
Oh, I see.
everything's going up and down and the wind is
Yes, right,
blowing.
I see its head now.
Yeah,
I see
there's
one.
his,
Yes.
there's his bill, but I can't make it out. I think it's a ring bill,
But I thought the wing
but it might be, it could very still be a herring, and I'm not even sure it's a full adult yet. So that's a good question, but that's the kind of thing, sometimes you pick out the bird that looks different. And that sometimes turns out to be an oddball or a rarity, so it works. It's good if you're familiar with that field of view, and then you see something go by that looks different, that gives you something to laugh at. We had some great cormorants up there. That's the bird's name, great cormorant, which is a European bird that comes down in the wintertime. Usually at Indian River, we get a couple. Ocean City is much less common. We have the double crested. Yeah. So waterfowl can look like that. I do my best. All right. We didn't get a good look at these guys because the flocks disappeared, but we did have some flyovers for pickering. These are snow geese, correct. All white with the black wingtips. Swans do not have the black wingtips. They're also much bigger and they hoot quite a bit. But what's that dark thing in the middle?
Is that the blue morph that we talked about?
Right, that's the blue morph. That's the blue goose. Used to be considered a separate species, it's now known to be a color morph. Okay, it has a whitish head, beautiful blue body, bluish with some light gray and white mixed in with it. It's flying with the snow geese, the profile is about the same, but it is not a distinct species. They do occasionally interbreed these two morphs and you get mixes of both. Here on the Atlantic flyway, blue goose is usually less than 10% or so of the snow goose population. I really was hoping when we went to Blackwater, we'd see a lot of them because the ones that were there, the snow geese that were there not too long before we got, several days before we got there, had a high proportion of blues. And it's a very pretty bird.
So are the feathers actually blue or are they iridescent?
They're not iridescent, it's a
Yeah.
blue-gray.
And it's not the same color as the tips of the snow geese?
No, it's not blackish.
It's
No,
not,
it's a slate
Yeah.
intermixed with cream. Best thing to do is look at some pictures and you
Yeah.
can see what a handsome bird it really is. It's really, really pretty. The other, we did see the lone snow goose on the water, probably injured, maybe bird flu, but it was mixing in.
Does the snow goose have a lot of flexibility in its wings? Look at some of them are straight, some of them are arched back, so they move that elbow?
Yeah, they can, and basically they're not flying in synchrony.
No.
So they're flying, probably that's an arm of a V when I got the picture. That was not my picture, it was taken by a landowner somewhere. But so you're seeing the flaps at various degrees. And birds, when they fly, crows really show this. They almost look like they're rowing sometimes. If you can see them from the side and the wind beats aren't too fast. So we're seeing kind of that bit. Some of them might even be gliding in that particular picture. But if you do, if there are still snows going over, which is, I don't think is going to happen, but if they are, look up there for a darker bird, or if you see them on the ground, have a look through for a darker bird with a white head. That'll be a blue.
Saw them in Denton on Tuesday,
Uh-huh.
600.
Yeah, really. And then, okay,
And they were coming in for the evening, it was late afternoon. So
Okay.
they're not gone yet.
okay, so they're
Days
still
ago.
around. I haven't seen any in the air lately, but Blackwater was
I hadn't
disappointing.
either.
They're usually a huge flock. So that's life. Maybe that just that flock left and we're still getting some others coming in. The weather's supposed to ameliorate by the weekend, so maybe there'll be some birds in the air. Anyway, look for the darker bird. And if they're on the ground, you'll be able to make it out by the darker body and the lighter head. And we had a good look at that injured or whatever it was, snow down at Blackwater. And I mentioned the grin patch, which is where the two mandibles come together along here, which is black. And it's both those morphs have it.
Do they have two mandibles, not a maxilla and a mandible?
Well, it's an upper and a lower.
Okay.
I always used upper and lower. But anyway, the green patch is kind of a swelling of black along the edges where they come together. Okay. All right. I'm going to end this for a moment and go to eBird. If I can find it. And in eBird, when I log into my account, you can do what's called a trip list. And there's a bracket of time that you can do a trip report. And our trip report, our field trips all managed to fit in that bracket. So I could do one trip report which summarizes all the birds we saw. This actually shows all the places we went. And here's the list with 65 species, and I submitted 13 checklists. The last one on Monday was part of the Great Yard, got incorporated into the Great Backyard Bird Count for that weekend. That count went from Friday through Monday. So these of course are best estimates when we get big numbers, but we had snow geese. What I'm going to do is just go through this. If anybody has a question about identification, this is a good time to pick it up because I can click on this and show you the bird. So there's a branch. We saw them at Ocean City Inlet. It's a very dark, smaller goose. Doesn't honk, it kind of cackles a bit. Has a little mark on the neck here which shows up on most birds. And tends not to associate with Canada's. All right. It's, for us, it's a coastal bird. Seeing it on Chesapeake Bay is extremely rare, but it does happen. Zillions of Canada geese. We had most of the tundra swan we saw were in that flock down at Blackwater. We had some shovelers. At Blackwater, we had two drakes and a hen. That's the best look we had at them. We would have done better at Berlin if they hadn't been iced over, because they're in there now doing their collaborative feeding, swimming around in circles, using their bills as a sieve, holding their head underwater, and sieving the water that's been kicked up, the mud that's been kicked up from the bottom, all working together. It's really interesting behavior.
Now is the drake beak green?
Pardon?
Is the drake's beak green or
No,
no?
no, it's dark.
Is the
I've forgotten because I haven't really paid attention to it. Has a green head that doesn't have that white ring that a mallard has, and the telling field mark when you see it on the ground or occasionally in the air is this patch of red tan that goes all the way around the belly and up the other side. So it kind of looks like it's dark, light in flight. And the bill, if you're close enough, the bill is huge. So that also shows up, makes it look big-headed. Okay, that's the northern shoveler. The hen, it has similar profiles, but that does not have the, this is a non-breeding male, but the hen looks a lot like that. Okay, where's the bill? Huge bill.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
That's its name.
Shoveler, the shoveler. We had a few gadwall on our coastal trip. These are very gray ducks, dabbling ducks. We got most of the dabblers. We did pretty well with those. American widgeon, which we had great looks at, of course, down at Oakley Street. Mallards, almost everywhere we went, we pick up a mallard or two. It took us, we had to go to Blackwater to get the black duck. The body of the black duck is darker than the hen mallard's body. Hen mallard looks light compared to that. The body is very dark. The hen is a bit lighter, so there's a bit of a contrast when you see them on the water. But the best mark, to me, when they're in the air, or if they fly, is that white wing line, which really contrasts the duck body. The speculum on a black duck has no white lines. The mallard has white lines fore and aft, and the speculum on the mallard is usually bluer than that. This one often shows up to be purple, but depends on the light, as many of these iridescent feathers are. Okay.
Now,
So
the difference between male and female, I struggle with that.
I probably couldn't separate them apart very well. The female has more of a pattern on the bill, but
That's
I
what I
don't
was
use it.
noticing, like
Yeah,
a little duller than the male might be a little more yellowish.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And the problem with ducks is they go into this plumage called eclipse. After the breeding season, the males in particular lose a lot of their feathers and sometimes are unable to fly. And they take on a plumage that's very similar to the female. And that lasts until into the fall, which by the time hunting season rolls around, the males are back to their breeding plumage. But during late summer, if you go to places like Bombay Hook or whatever, see ducks there, it's sometimes quite a challenge to figure out what they are, even though they're probably common. So ducks are their own challenge as well. But that white wing lining, if the bird flies, that's really easy to see because it flashes against the black body. Pintail, we breeded that. We had our green-winged teal down at Pickering Creek, had good looks at several drakes. This is a small bird. We also got some at Blackwater, though most of you didn't see it because they flew over my car. There was a herd of about 8 of them or so. But they're small ducks. Teal are very little. So they're small ducks with kind of a buzzy flight. And of course, you can tell if they're a puddle duck or not if they spook from the water, which they often do. You can see them jump right up. And sometimes they form at Pickering fairly large flocks. You may see a couple of hundred there sometimes, all at once. Canvasback we looked at. The red head has a canvasback looking head except for the shape, and the back is gray. It's not the traditional white canvas. Ringneck duck we've seen. We saw a lot of greater skunk when we went down to South Point on our coastal trip. They have it's very difficult to tell skunk apart unless you can get good looks at them. The greater skunk, in breeding plumage in particular, has a whiter side than the lesser. That helps. It has no top knot, smooth head, and in most lights, it'll have a greenish tinge to the head. Some field guys say that's not as reliable, and it's true, especially the purplish cast to the head of the lesser skunk. It depends on the light. But if you see the green, it's probably a greater, unless there's a hint of some feathering up here. And in my opinion, if there's any feathering at all, then it's a lesser fan. Lots of them at Oakley Street. Get good looks at those. They'll still be around for a while. We got a nice flock of them. Greater skunk likes bigger water. Lesser will be found closer to shore and in the tributaries much more than the greater one.
At Oakley Street, at other seasons, are there different birds? Is it just a winter place?
Well, time allowing, I'll get to this, but I will say this much in answer to that right away. Almost every duck we saw, with the exception of mallard and black duck, do not breed here in Chesapeake. So you go to Oakley Street in the summer, if there's anything there at all, it'll probably just be mallards. I've never done that. That's probably the case. There are always exceptions of one or two of something might show up anywhere, but they do not breed here.
It's not like other things come in for the summertime.
That's right. That's right. We've had eiders on Poplar Island. So we had a king eider there several years ago, but that's not normal. So teal, all these birds that are so abundant now, leave. We do this course in the winter with good reason. We looked at these scoters. We saw some beautiful long-tailed duck off of Tillman, as well as, man, there were some gorgeous ones up at Indian River that we didn't get to see. Bufflehead kind of are everywhere. They're kind of like the mallard of the coastal diving ducks. We had a few golden eye. This one has, we talked about puffy heads. This one has it in spades. And the head shape is actually fairly distinctive. It does have a sloping forehead, but it doesn't have the same shape of the head that a canvasback has. They do show a lot of white on the side, not on the back, and this big patch in front of the eye. Common golden. Female has the, get female here. Female, oops, the same puffy type of head. That's it. Same puffy type of head. The male does. Some white on the wings when you see it. I've found in Chesapeake once in a while you do see these by themselves, and they become a what's it duck, and you just kind of go through, is it this, is it this, is it this, and finally say, oh, it's probably a golden eye. If it's up close, it's easy. Okay. Okay. The mergansers, we did it. We had a trifecta. We had hooded common at the last place we stopped. That was a distant look. Some of you had trouble finding it among the weeds, but this is what we saw. This is the common merganser. Unlike the other mergansers, it has no crest and no shaggy bad hair day. Look, the common merganser, unlike the red breast, doesn't have that shaggy crest. It's smooth on the head. We could see we were close enough, at least in the scope, to see a nice bright red bill, and everybody was remarking, gee, it's really white. It's a big duck. It's a big duck, bigger than a mallard, more like a loon, but very white on the side, and you could see that without the binoculars. Make that out. Female is like the female red-breasted with the bad hair. There are some differences in the throat patch and other things. Usually, especially this time of year, they're associated with the drakes, and you won't have a problem with that. Common merganser is more of a bird, especially as it's moving north of freshwater, upper tributaries that are not too salty. Red-breasted merganser likes the open Chesapeake Bay, especially the southern part, and also the coastal bays and offshore. So it's more of a saltwater bird. And we saw them at the inlet. Okay. Donnybrook, have good looks at that. Now we get into stuff that's not really those. I'm just putting them in because of the great Decker bird count. We had one killdeer. It was the only thing we saw when we got to the icy places at Berlin, Heron Falls Park. But the killdeer is a plover. Its behavior when it is feeding, that one was just sitting still, but when they're feeding, they walk and stop, walk and stop. There are other plovers that do that as well, but they're all plovers. The killdeer has 2 breast bands. There's a similar bird we'll see in the springtime that has only 1. That's the semi-palmated plover. It's also small. This is the killdeer, named for its call. And it's a water bird for us because it's typically found near water, but many plovers are more upland as well and will actually be found in fields and somebody's driveway.
Well, it's a parking lot.
Yes, and parking lots and so on. If they had a choice, I think they would prefer wet fields. But they don't have that much of a choice anymore. We saw a few other shorebirds. The American oyster catcher with the big red bill, big black and white bird. I saw a ruddy turnstone. I tried to get some other folks on it. I'm not sure we were succeeding in doing that, but usually it's there with some of the other shorebirds at the Ocean City Inlet. In winter plumage, the sanderling is our whitest sandpiper in the winter. Much more streaky in the summer, and it's the one that goes back and forth with the waves that you'll see on the beach in August. They have already bred and on their way back down to the winter. The mousy-backed dunlin, and then the gulls themselves. We had 3 gulls. We did have Forster's tern. When I saw it flying in front of me on the car, I noted right away. It's not our common winter tern. It's not that common, but it's the only one we're likely to see in the wintertime. Terns are more dainty than gulls. They have narrower wings and more of a bounding type of flight. And in the Forsters, the silvery ends of the wings on the upper side. The overall effect is kind of a silvery white bird, helps give it away. As with most terns, it has a black cap in the breeding season. In the non-breeding season and in juveniles, the cap becomes a mark back from the eye that does not wrap around the back of the head. It's just a dash of black. In the common tern, in winter plumage, as a few go through here because they breed on Poplar Island, the black mark goes all the way around the neck. And in a common tern, the ends of the wings are grayish, so it doesn't have that silvery looking appearance. There are some other things that field guides will point out in terms of bill color and leg tile color and all of that, but the jizz is really the helpful thing with these birds. A whitish tern, bounding along, and this bird, the Forster's, when it's feeding, will often dive on the water. The common tern tends to pick off the surface. So all those things help you home in on Forsters, and it's generally our most common tern here, and it does breed in this region. Okay, we barely got a horned grebe. I won't go into that one too much. We had red-throated and common loon. The red-throated loon looks like the bill is slightly upturned. This is in breeding plumage. What we saw was probably more like that. They'll start to turn later on. And again, the bill, it's not so much upturned as the lower mandible is chiseled in such a way that it makes it look upturned. And unlike the common loon, it tends to hold its bill a little above the horizontal. It's a more dainty bird. The neck is not as thick, and the overall impression is a light gray or a lighter color than the common loon in wintertime. Common loon is a fairly robust big bird.
Do they tend to be solitary birds, not in flocks so much? Or
Not so much in flocks. All the loons do feed collectively if they're overfished.
Okay,
So sometimes off the mouth of the chop tank in the early fall, you'll see lots of them
okay.
kind of carrying on. And I've found in the springtime, when we go down to our condo and if the red throats are migrating, there'll be lots of them moving along together. Not so much as a coordinated flock, just lots of individuals flying by. Okay. Down here a bit. We saw the 3 gulls, the Forster's tern, the loons, double-crested cormorant, which is the common cormorant in the wintertime. It's not a very common bird, but in the wintertime, there are gazillions of them off Poplar Island breeding in that area. So you see lots of them in the summertime. And if you go down to Tillman in the early fall, like late August and September, you'll see them sitting all on the offshore fish nets. You know, one on every pole, and lots more in the water.
You know, that would be a great handy list to have, which is, here's the location, here's the time of year, here's where you might be able to see. Does that exist?
Not quite that way. eBird does provide it. If you pick a spot, you can pick a hot
Okay,
spot
and
and see that.
then the time of year, okay, yeah.
Yeah, you can do it that way. That's probably as good as any. We had a black crown. We had, of course, great blue. Talked a little bit about vultures. We had, I had a second northern harrier after you guys left down in Blackwater. I had the gray ghost. This is the kind of bird that we saw, which is an immature or a female, but that white rump patch shows up very well. It flies typically when it's not migrating, it flies low over the marsh while it's hunting, holds its wings in a slight dihedral, tilts around a lot, kind of an erratic flight, looking for rodents if it possibly can. There's the gray ghost is really pretty. So dark wingtips, nice light gray. It's smaller than the females, which is true for lots of raptors. The female birds and some of the immatures, they're well fed, are bigger than the adult males. Really pretty bird, and probably 1 in 10, if you see them often enough, will be a gray ghost.
So we tend to see them this time of the year then.
We typically, we can see them in the winter if it doesn't snow too much. They probably move fairly south, but they do migrate through here, and a few stay to breed. Down Blackwater, southern Dorchester County, that's a good places for it. I've had them fly over the field in front of my house. So, they just like open marshes and meadows. So, old name marshhawk. I mentioned fish crow. We heard of them at a couple of places, especially Ocean City. It does not call like the American crow. All right, very nasal. They'll start appearing in some numbers as spring advances. You may hear them in small flocks flying over as they move along. They breed up in this area. They tend not to winter here. We get a few on the Christmas bird count every year, usually down at Oxford. But there seems to be a resident group down in Cambridge, so they show up when you go down to the Cambridge waterfront. The rest of these are pretty much Tweety birds, the red-winged blackbird being the exception, but you all know that one pretty well with the red epaulets. They're beginning now to space out over the marsh. There's still some fairly large blackbird flocks around, which to the dismay of people that have feeders. But the way I discourage them is I have one tube feeder and I plug all the holes but one with wine corks. And that makes them pretty hard. They're not really well built to feed on perches close to tube feeders, so it's hard work for them to begin with, and then they have to fight over it. And after a couple of days, they usually leave. If you have a bad problem with blackbirds, especially now with bird flu, you really don't want that much around. It's probably a good idea to just don't feed for a couple of days till the flock moves, and then start again. That also works. Okay, so that's our eBird. Any question about, let's see, we go to 4, right? Yeah. Any question about any of the birds that we've seen, ID problems, things that you want to clarify or whatever? This is, with our list here, this is easy to do. I'm glad to help you out.
When you see the terns flying,
Yes.
how can you spot them versus the gulls?
The gulls, it's another jizz thing. They're more dainty on the whole. They're more dainty. The wings are thinner and pointed, whereas the gull wingtips are more rounded in most of them. Okay. And the flight is somewhat more bounding and erratic overall. They just look lighter. Now, when you get to the Caspian, the world's largest, we don't have it on this list here, but when we get to the Caspian tern, it has a big blood red bill, but it's so big that it almost looks like a gull. The wing beats are slower and much more powerful looking. almost looks like a falcon. So the Caspian tern and the royal tern are birds we didn't see. They're here in the summer and they migrate through in the fall and Caspian in the spring in particular. And when they're in the air, they're going to look more gull-like because of the powerful wing beats that they have. But they still look slimmer overall. They don't have the body bulk that a gull has.
And do they fly in groups?
When they're migrating the Caspian, sometimes you'll see more than one and flying together. Royal terns, I find, especially in the fall along the ocean there, you'll see 2 or 3 together, just sort of maybe a family group, something like that. Other terns, it depends. If you're close to where they're breeding, like a Forster tern breeds in a chop tank in certain areas there, you sometimes see a bunch, but they're not really behaving as a flock. It's just more or less a concentration. You'll get good practice on it because we have the gulls and the terns here in the summertime and spring migration and and fall migration. So you have a good chance a bunch of them. But the datiness of most terns stands out.
It's a Latin gull, just a summer type of gull.
That's a summer gull. It's a black-headed gull. Okay, it has a black head in the summertime. And in the spring, when the flocks are going through, they often follow tractors and fields to feed on the worms and things that are plowed up. Sometimes lots of them, sometimes by the hundreds. And they have that, well, with the kids, we call them the giggle gulls. But in the winter, they lose their head, a black head. I think we don't need this list anymore, so I'll just see if we have it. It's a slideshow. I had it one time.
If you click in the top right corner, there's like a dash.
Yeah.
If you click that, it'll drop it out of the way. Yeah.
Okay. That's the show. I must have closed the other.
Oh, so go down to the
Yeah.
bottom, go down all the way to the
Bottom,
bottom and
Chrome.
click on Chrome.
Yeah.
And that should, oh, you must have closed it out.
Yeah, I must have.
Go in as Chesapeake form,
Okay. And then I can just.
and then see,
Cornell.
Trina's bookmarks on the left should be,
Okay.
bookmark showing there?
Google, Bird, Cornell, here it is.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, I'll find it. This is basically links to Merlin. And we can search for hope. Well, come on.
What kind of bird is that showing?
That's a rosy finch.
He's so cute.
There. Let's try to search for laughing gull. Okay. There you go. So here it is in breeding season with the dark head. And it's our only really dark-headed gull. It has some other gifs about it too. The mantle is kind of an intermediate between a great blackback gull, it's a grayer mantle, and a herring gull. Very noisy in breeding season. In wintertime, it looks, like that. Has a smudge on the back of the head. And when I say wintertime, it actually loses its black head in the late summer.
And the red beak is gone.
And the red beak is gone. And it's very common as a surf fisherman when I'm over at Ocean City in the fall, lots of them. They begin to clear out around Christmas time, and the nearest wintering birds are probably down in Norfolk, Virginia or something like that. We're a little bit far north of that at the moment.
So I have a quick color bill question. When I was just in La Jolla, there's a gull there, it's California, and on the beak is a bright red spot. And I was told that the chicks see and hit that spot to get the mom to regurgitate the food into it. So are any of these colorful bills triggers for the chicks?
Herring gull has that.
Ah, the herring.
Yeah. Among others, but that one certainly does. Let's see. It's now called the American herring gull, by the way.
Along with American Gulf,
Yeah. Yes,
Gulf of America, I mean, whatever the heck it is.
yeah, see the mark?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's
Yes,
what you're
yes,
talking
I
I'm
know.
saying that the chicks tap at that mark, and I believe that in the blackback, I think there's two marks. I think there's a black and a red. I forgot exactly. But you can see it here on the breeding dog as well.
That's the young. That's what she's talking about.
There you go. So again, that's as Mary said, they tap the young tap on that, and then the adult regurgitates to feed. So it's a release sort of thing.
So that's.
In the wintertime, there are marks on the bill, but it's not that red.
So the ringbill gull and the herring gull, they still stick around in the summertime here?
Yeah.
So then we got 3 different kind of gulls.
Right. Now, the ringbill, the center of its breeding is really the Great Lakes, but we do get some out here on Paparotti. Not many. Most of them move north. Herring gull population on Papa is pretty good. They do real well with that one. And on the coast, if they can find places where they can breed. We have that lady Kim Applin that is setting up gull islands, artificial gull islands in the summertime in the bays behind Ocean City. And one of her problems is blackback gulls and herring gulls who come in and eat the eggs, the terns that she's trying to protect. So they man carefully and often those locations to avoid that problem. And as I said, use the herring gull as an example. In the wintertime, they get streaky on the head, which when I was a novice birder, I used to think was a different species. Okay. Good questions. Anything else?
Can I ask you about wood ducks?
Mhm.
When we paddle around, especially in the middle of our upper shop town, we see numerous wood duck houses put up in mostly the marshy kind of areas.
Mhm.
I never remember ever seeing a wood duck.
I mean, the houses
Well,
have.
Some of it's timing. We have a wood duck program at Pickering Creek where they actually monitor those boxes, and they do find lots of eggs inside. And the chicks tend to leave fairly early when they're still small and light and can flutter down without hurting themselves. Bufflehead is another hole nester, by the way, not here. But they hatch literally in a day or two. They leave the hole. And wood ducks take longer. But if you're not there at the right time, there won't be anything in the nest. And of course, if they have eggs, they probably are staying inside. They don't tend to defend them the way a songbird. So that unless you're really interfering with the nest, probably the duck's best idea is to retreat so you wouldn't see them around. So that's probably why you're not seeing them.
Why is there the interest in putting up all these wood duck houses?
Recovery. Everybody likes a wood duck. It's such a colorful bird.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the pictures.
Yeah. But basically, it's just it is one of the other ducks that does breed here, and it's largely a matter of trying to keep the population as stable as possible, if not increasing,
And we have,
kind of like bluebirds.
we have nest boxes at Seabeck. I'm a volunteer there. And by the way, we're looking for volunteers to help monitor those.
And you can see plenty.
Oh, yeah.
Atkins is putting the boxes.
There's-
See back in Pickering Creek, and who knows what's going to happen with
First time.
Blackwater and some of our other wildlife refuges here. May turn out that volunteers are really going to be important to help keep these things afloat. But yeah, it could be a matter of timing. It also could be a matter that the boxes are not being maintained and cleaned, so they're not attractive to the birds, especially if you're just out in a marsh and there's no obvious trail for the box itself. All of those possible. But they're doing well at Pickering. I mean, on the whole, the program's been very good, and I assume that the same as at Seabeck.
Last year was down, was not a good year, but previous to that, it's been very
It's
good.
a good year. Other,
This is not related to our trips, but you mentioned bird flu. Is there any evidence to suggest it will be transmitting to songbirds?
I talked to a colleague just yesterday who was asking, should she keep feeding birds? And I'm no authority on this, and I don't want to be taken the wrong way. I told her that for songbirds at the moment, there's not a lot of evidence that there's a problem, that the biggest problem has been with the migratory waterfowl, which are in great big flocks. That could be true also for blackbirds, I don't know. Finding a dead blackbird
Because
is
they
not the
cross
same.
contagion, because the flock is a source of.
It could jump.
Finish your sentence, because of the floods or, here.
Well, the big flocks of Canada geese and snow geese and everything else are so compacted that it's easy for the virus to move from one to the other. Jumping from a flock like that to songbirds would be a little bit tougher. One of the issues with songbirds is not getting them into your chicken coops and farms, because if those birds are regularly feeding in there, they could bring in the virus. So that's an issue that. But I told her basically, if you don't see any evidence of sick birds, you're probably okay with feeding. I would discourage feeding large flocks of blackbirds.
I was just gonna throw in, I talked to my vet, and I was unaware of the fact that if wild birds like songbirds walk through the fecal matter, it will transfer.
Yes.
And so she said, stop feeding birds because I have cats.
Yeah. So large flocks, I mean, if you have a lot of feeder activity and so on, right now, feeders, because of the cold weather, it's probably less transmittable than it would be at other times. And as our huge flocks of waterbirds leave, then maybe that will mitigate some of these problems. It is a risk, and I mean, if you really want to be careful, then I wouldn't feed. But I basically said, feeder activity really went up with these cold snaps around here. And, I mean, they ran out of food at Tractor Supply and everything else. So obviously the birds are using that food source. Lots of birds like chickadees and titmice and nuthatches cache the food. And so if you don't feed for a couple of days or go away or whatever, they can find their cache. They have great memories. They can locate the caches and feed, so they don't necessarily starve when you stop feeding. But if you have huge amounts of birds, especially blackbirds and other things that are flocks, that might pick up a virus somewhere and it could transmit through the flock fairly well. As you know, we saw quite a few, a good half dozen, if not more, dead geese and swans at Blackwater. I'm sure that that's bird flu. Mr. Humans is beyond my ken. I'm just not kind of an authority. Okay, well, I promised that one thing I would do at the end is talk about waterfowl conservation. So I'm going to do that with an example, and we'll wrap up with that particular thing. Okay, I'm going to get out of this. Get back to this. And we will continue with the slideshow. Remember that we had 65 species, and I mentioned it to be the first class that birds are linked to happiness levels. We all know that now. You don't need a research paper. But one of the things that in this paper that appeared in 2020 was that, and this is for a European study, being around 14 additional bird species provided as much satisfaction as earning an additional $150 a month. That's about $10 a bird. And if you want to do the math,
Yeah.
you have made almost $700. So don't complain about the cost. And I think we had a lot of fun, so that's great. I also said, of course, the bad news, this paper that appeared in 2019 on the decline of North American birds overall by Rosenberg et al., talking about the loss of about a third of our North American bird population in the last 50 years. And there have been, both in that paper and subsequently, there have been attempts to graphically represent that. This one just shows the sort of general decline. It doesn't mean they had dates for all this on this line. And then over here, in the original paper by Rosenberg, they defined the birds by large habitat. That is what they call biomes, which are areas of similar habitat over large areas of North America. So we had wetlands and we have western forest and eastern forest and grasslands. Some of those biomes make sense in terms of specific species, some of them don't. For example, the bobwhite, which I consider a grassland bird, the grassland biome is actually around the Great Plains. And bobwhite is actually considered, in this paper, an eastern forest bird, which doesn't help us out very much. But one thing that does help us out is the fact that the wetland species are the only group in the biomes that have increased in the last 50 years. And one of the questions immediately comes to mind, why? Here's a new take on
Well,
it.
it's global warming and we got way more water.
No, actually, it's a better story than that.
Someone managed.
This is done by the Committee on North American Bird Conservation, what they call the State of the Birds Report. And here they've drafted them by species groups, which is a lot more meaningful to me. And in this, geese and swans went off the map, up, way up, 1,000% increase.
The Canada goose, well, it skews the whole thing.
Yes, it
It
does.
out.
That does, but luckily with this course, we can break it down a little further. Dabbling ducks also, and diving ducks also increased. It turns out they breed in similar areas, so that's good news. Water birds in general, not, and this is fairly large generality because they don't talk about shorebirds. They don't include shorebirds in it. Talking more about herons, things like that. They have increased a bit, up to 20%. Then we start to get into declines, and the birds we're interested in are the sea ducks. They've declined. We think that decline reflects some global warming issues in terms of affecting their breeding grounds. They do not breed in the area I'm going to talk about in a minute. They don't breed here. They breed up in the Greenland area, Iceland, and northern Canada. And there's some evidence that there may be some effects of global warming on that habitat. Not sure. In terms of the 1,000% increase in geese and swans, the scuttlebutt is basically they have adapted to human-managed environments. So we find a lot of geese in our agricultural fields now, feeding on corn and things that the harvester missed, and the same is true for swans in general. There was a concerted effort to increase snow geese because they were declining badly 40, 50 years ago, but it got too good. And the snow geese actually have overpopulated in many ways, and they do a lot of damage to habitat because they pull up plants by the roots. And so it would be nice if we had somewhat fewer overall, because they can really mess up a marsh if they decide to roost there for a few days. Shorebirds have declined, grassland birds have declined. When I do my other course, I talk more about that. But one of the, in the State of the Birds report, there are birds that have declined by 50% or more in the last 50 years, and they're considered tipping point species, that they're teetering on the brink of perhaps not being able to return, says the State of the Birds report. I don't know how true that really will turn out to be. But what about these waterfowl, the dabbling ducks and the diving ducks and so on? And to do that, I need to take you out to the upper Midwest, to an area of the United States called the prairie pothole region. And remember, I mentioned most of our ducks don't breed here. They're winter residents for us. They'll be leaving, many have already. All those pintails will be gone. That region includes parts of Alberta, about a third of it, almost half of Saskatchewan, a piece of Manitoba, a good chunk of North and South Dakota, into Iowa and Minnesota, and a little bit of Montana where the prairies exist in the northern part. That's this area. The area is, I don't remember numbers well, so I'm going to try to do this as best I can. It's 300,000 square miles. By comparison, Delmarva is 5,450 square miles. It's a huge region in the United States and in Canada. It was created as the last glaciers left at the end of the last ice age, 10,000 or so years ago. As the glaciers retreated, they left big chunks of ice across the landscape that slowly melted. In New England, those things are sometimes called kettle pots.
Sure.
You know, here in this region, which is much flatter, they're potholes. They're basically depressions that usually don't go down as deep as the groundwater, which means that these potholes actually fill with water and snow melt. And then if it's a dry year, they actually lose their water.
Is that why Minnesota is like the land of 500 lakes or whatever the heck they call it? Is that because of that?
Part of it is due to glaciers, but not so much the potholes, not so much the potholes. But part of that is due to glaciation, which also scarred up that landscape, created, just as it did in New England with the Eskers, and so on. This is a view of a particularly potty-holy part of that landscape. The average size of the potholes was about 3.5 acres. And in areas like this, there may be up to 180 or so of them per square mile of landscape. They're surrounded, originally, they were part of a prairie landscape and they were surrounded therefore by grasslands. As I said, their average size is about 3.5 acres. They annually fill in the spring with snowmelt and rainfall in decent years. And then in the summers, they often go dry, or at least the water level goes way down. Every year with precipitation changes, every year is kind of different in that regard. The beauty of it is that this change in water level basically makes the habitat especially good for ducks and waterfowl. When the land goes dry, that increases the aeration of the soil and the degradation of plant matter because oxygen gets to it and releases a lot of nutrients into the soil. When the land goes wet again, those nutrients stimulate plant growth. So you have an annual cycle like this. It's a cycle that I mentioned a little bit about at Pickering Creek, where I talked about the fact that that's passively managed, as are the potholes in this regard. Passively managed, it depends on how much precipitation they have. None of those wetlands are connected to any creeks. This is all based on snowmelt and rainfall, and in the summertime they go down. Last year was very dry, and I mentioned the fact that there was a lot of grasses in those ponds and no water. At that point, no waterfowl either, but they've since recovered a good deal. And I expect a good spring for those ducks that would breed there. Out in the prairie pothole region, this turns out to be just incredible. They support up to 130 duck pairs per square mile in the best areas. It includes both dabblers and some small dabbling ducks, including mallard, gadwall, blue-winged teal, shoveler, canvasbacks, redhead, lesser skull. 50% of the waterfowl that are produced by breeding in North America breed here. 50%.
Is it protected at all by any government?
That's what we're going to get to. Good question. Good question. There have been deliberate attempts to protect these areas. Here's a close-up of it. Originally, these lands were grazed because they were grasslands. And you can see some dots in here. These are cattle, right, on this particular kind of landscape. You can't see ducks. It's a little bit too small. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came into the area because hunters and groups like Ducks Unlimited were interested in the fact that the duck populations were starting to fall. And so they have set up more refuges than any other per square mile than any other region of the United States. It works out to about 915,000 acres of refuges, or about 0.5% of the total land area of the prairie pothole region. About 0.5%. It's a drop in the bucket, but a drop. It's a significant drop. They were great for grazing. It was like a wet Great Plains. But as agriculture and industrialized agriculture began to develop, the same kind we have here, corn, wheat, soybean rotations, plowed landscapes, that's not consistent with a landscape that looks like this. And so slowly, the potholes areas were being drained and eliminated for larger scale agriculture. So no longer pasture, but more now that it's been estimated up to, in some areas, up to 90% of the potholes have been lost in certain regions of this particular region. The effect was pretty bad on our waterfowl populations. But just to show you how important it is, this is the prairie pothole region on the left. On the right is the breeding range of one of our ducks that happens to be very famous here in Chesapeake Bay. pretty good overlap.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's true for a lot of the other ducks that we enjoy here in the Chesapeake and use in the wintertime. When the populations began to decline back in the late 1900s, 1970, 1980, sometimes like that, Ducks Unlimited really got involved. And basically, 1985 was the turning year for that. There's a canvasback coming in for a landing. This is from a video, so it's kind of messed up. There's a lesser scaup in the background, and that might be a widgeon hen in the foreground, and on the far left is a ruddy. So you can see it's quite a mix that occurs in just this particular pothole. 1985 was the turning point in some year. The 1985 Farm Bill, thanks to the efforts of conservation groups, including Ducks Unlimited as one of the primary players in this, they convinced the USDA to take the original Conservation Reserve Program, the CRP they call it, and to designate the entire U.S. prairie pothole region, not the Canadian, they have no authority, U.S. prairie pothole region as a conservation priority area. What that change in the Farm Bill meant is that farmers would become eligible for cost share to take their land out of commercial production, and they would be paid the price in addition to which they were encouraged to plant native plants to encourage duck populations. In other words, save the potholes, plant some plants, and take the agriculture out of commission in those areas. And there was funding for the farmers to do that as a cost share. So they didn't lose a ton of money in taking their land out of production. That program, here in Maryland, we have something called the Enhanced CRP, Conservation Reserve Program. And it's the same type of thing. Pay farmers, in this case for Chesapeake Bay, to take land out of production and to put buffers in or other types of grasslands and other types of habitat to basically do habitat preservation. That was in 1985 Farm Bill. By 1993, 7% of the land in the U.S. prairie pothole region had been enrolled in CRP.
Almost 7%.
Only 7, but how many? What percentage was wildlife refuges? 0.5%. Not 50%, not 5%, 0.5%. So it's a huge difference in terms of being able to work with this bit. It was estimated based on data that between 1992 and 97, an additional 10.5 million ducks, an additional 10.5 million ducks were recruited into the population as a result of this program.
Is the program contingent on attitudes from given administrations?
Of course. Yes.
So it's nothing for.
And enrollment is totally voluntary. You don't have to do this. I presume some farmers opted out.
Well, you need the funds to pay the farmers, and if the funds dry up, even if the farmers want it.
No cost share. Yep. And then they have to go back to standard agriculture. The contracts for CRP are roughly a 10-year contract. And it is renewable, but typically you're locked in for 10 years to do and get the cost share money for this sort of thing. This is what the prairie pothole region looks like. One dot is 1,000 CRP acres enrolled in the U.S. Pretty cool. And these are data from duck recruitment. Again, each year is different because of the general wet and dry years. 1985 was when the Farm Bill started. There was a nice response right after that. Then we had a lot of dry years into the early 90s, and then it picked up again. But this is the U.S. trend, thanks to that. This is Canada.
Yeah.
Doesn't have a similar program. So there are several lessons here, I guess, that I'd like to be able to say. One is it's a voluntary program. It's not the government coming in and saying, you got to do this or we're going to fine you. It's working with the landowners. And The lesson here, participate in the conservation of birds, in this case on waterfowl, is to participate in the conservation of land. And who are the participants? Us. Us. We. And it's not necessarily some kind of law that has to come in and fine you or challenge you in some way. It's rather some way of finding and working with the landowners as Ducks Unlimited is doing. And they're benefiting us way out here.
Duck state.
Duck stamps, any other types of the money that can be funneled into programs like this,
That's a good
sure.
way if you buy the duck stamp.
Yeah, that's
That
another
goes
conservation.
towards purchasing land.
Right.
It's-
Joining Ducks
Hunters are
Unlimited.
required to buy it,
Right.
but as birders,
Yeah, we can.
we want to.
Yeah, we have the Waterfowl Festival here, we have duck stamp design winners every year. Mike Parr, who's a very avid conservationist, president of American Birds Conservancy, basically admits you can't protect all habitat. We tried that with all the Fish and Wildlife Services refuges, all the blackwaters. We can't, it's great, we can't protect it all. So we have to work with the people who work the land, who own the land, in farmland, pasture and forest, to protect more habitat. We work with them. They get benefits because they get cost share. It probably matters, but it doesn't really matter over the bottom line if they get money by taking land into production or if they're spending money on huge combines and going into debt that way. I think a lot of farmers would prefer the former. So basically, to wind up with this sort of thing, it's the idea of working with people. This is why it's so upsetting to me and Mary and other people that we have administrative situations now where we're drying up the sources of fundings that have been working. And the relationship between us environmentalists and landowners, be they farmers or be they developers, working with them to try to come up with mutual solutions in a collaborative way. Some of it involves funding, but it doesn't involve necessarily rigorous types of penalties. It involves wanting to do the right thing. John Smith thought about this back when he wrote in 1612 that this was a country that may have the prerogative over the most pleasant places known, for large and pleasant navigable rivers, heaven and earth never agreed to frame a place for man's habitation. We live on one of the last great landscapes here on the Eastern Shore that is really a working landscape. We have production landscapes here, we have agriculture, and we also have a Chesapeake Bay that we're doing our very best to try to, I wouldn't say totally restore, but at least to prevent it from going down the tubes. And it's all a participatory type of thing.
You know, when you brought us on your last course to John Shea, what's his name?
Shaw.
Shaw. And there was a great example of an individual who's turned over acres and acres to have it returned to some natural grasses and birds and flowers. And it was a real eye-opener for us city kids.
And he's the exception because he didn't get a dime to do that.
No, but he has some money in his back
But
pocket.
he did it because he had money in his pocket.
Yeah.
But other farmers who have to depend on the bottom line can go into Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program in Maryland, for example. And there are a number of others as well that provide money through the Farm Bill, which is a complicated bill, provide funding through various programs that the Department of Agriculture, up until recently at least, was maintaining and working with those farmers to save. So I talk about working landscape in my last quote is just to tell you what I think a working landscape is based on this definition by Royce Hansen, who this time was chair of the Maryland Environmental Trust. This is back in 2002. He defined a working landscape as one that maintains and works to enhance the responsibility of private landowners individually to improve the land for successive generations of those who work it, and collectively to pass on to each new generation a landscape that is a greater environmental asset than they received. Moreover, a working landscape is an irreplaceable cultural resource. That's the closing message. I sure hope we can collaborate and save some of these programs because it means working with the community too. And that to me is premier. And if so, we'll save our waterfowl. Great.
Trips. Woo!